Hi everyone, William here with the Grand Duke Dmitri 1917 diary series. Excuse me, we're still doing the long diary entry of the 17th of November, 1917, of course. So this will be the third section of that we've done. And in the previous section, Dmitri was mainly focusing on the army, the idea of peace. It was clear that the Bolsheviks wanted a separate peace, and you would think maybe that would appeal to everyone, but Russia's reputation was at stake as a member of the alliance, the Entente. And that was, however we might feel about it, that was vitally important to the Russian officer corps. And they were very much invested in the idea of Russia continuing to be a great power and one with honor. So it was not a small deal. And Dmitri talked about two very interesting men, both called Nikolai, General Dukhonin, and Ensign Krylenko. I don't know where the stress is. The one was basically the supreme commander, chief of staff, and he had been instructed to make peace and with the Germans, and he refused. And so Krylenko, who was a lifelong Bolshevik and quite a sinister man on top of that, was chosen to replace him. And Dukhonin was ripped apart by a mob of soldiers. Dmitri talked about unconscious people who, for whom ideas like patriotism and like Russia as a nation were too abstract when compared to concrete things like being able to return home and being given the land. So we're going to continue on from that. So let's get started. That the army does not wish to fight, that it wants to go home as fast as possible to be given the land, that the army suffers every kind of deprivation because delivery and production have fallen terribly. All this, alas, is the actual truth. And therefore it's completely comprehensible that buying off the army, or at least the vast majority of the troops, is a thing very easily done. And therefore even I have now begun to think that the peace talks will be successful. Perhaps formally no one will speak with Lenin and his ministers, but the army itself will joyfully embrace the ideas and proposals of the Maximalists, promising the soldiers an end to the war, therefore an end to privation, and the land at home as a gift. And I see much more danger in the behavior of the army itself than in the actions of the Maximalist cabinet. But on the other hand, if Kerensky had achieved victory over the Bolsheviks, I think it would have been too soon. It would be necessary for both sides of democracy to properly blank. If Kerensky were to win now, then all that would come of it would be a continuation of what has been happening the whole 8 months of the revolution, the maintenance of revolutionary order, in quotation marks, and such rubbish, exclamation point. Now the more restrained part of democracy, or as it calls itself, revolutionary democracy, and that's in quotation marks, has collided with the Bolsheviks. The Mensheviks are terrified of losing power. Thus they are trying to oppose the Bolsheviks, but not at all from love for the motherland. And whatever they do, the struggle weakens them. And whatever they do, the struggle weakens them. That can only be a good thing for the state of things in general. Whatever they do, the struggle weakens them. That can only be a good thing for the state of things in general. Sorry about that. The Mensheviks were perfectly aware of this when they urged the country not to submit to the Maximalists. They said that the latter would kill the revolution and create an opportunity for reaction to spring up. And that, of course, is the cold, hard truth. All these new committees of public safety and committees for saving the motherland in the revolution, which have sprung up of late, do they really think about the motherland? Of course they don't. They just don't want to lose power. They don't want to give up the idea that to the Mensheviks, to revolutionary democracy, belong the first rights over poor, bleeding Russia. Strange though it is, I find the Bolsheviks more sympathetic. At least they are frank. They're fanatics and therefore boldly believe in their ideas, their ideals, and are prepared to die for them. But the Mensheviks prefer a continuation of the nonsense that's been going on these last months. They prefer to maintain revolutionism in the country in order to enjoy the fantastic benefits. That is, to live in the city at someone else's expense, participating in a committee and living without regard for the amount of state and public money spent, and loudly shouting about their love for Russia and the harm caused by desertion. Now the power of the maximalists threatens to deprive these patriots, these revolutionary Democrats, of the cozy places they gained by force, and not at all by the choice of the people or the trust of the population. And here there's a sentence that I've excised because I just can't, it's pretty illegible. I can't make out enough of it. So skipping that. And of course, it would be better that the first bloody struggle for the right to these places should be between the Democrats themselves, between their two currents. And this, of course, will weaken the struggle between them and those who come, relying on the true wishes of the people and true love of the motherland. And that is why, in the first place, I said that now, at this actual moment, the victory of Kerensky would be premature and undesirable. And in the second place, that I have more sympathy for the maximalists with their fanaticism and desire to achieve their aims and ideals at whatever cost. That is where one's thoughts go when they are allowed to drift to abstract questions. But if one takes a narrow view of affairs, then the situation is depressing. I like the way he puts that. That's where one's thoughts go when they are allowed to drift to abstract questions and thinking about them like a chess player would. But when he goes back to thinking, he says a narrow view, but when a more personal view, then it's depressing. Fair enough. Okay, so much. I may be a little ambitious covering this much ground in a single section, but it all kind of flows together. So where do you make the cut? Anyway, what he says about deprivation is, of course, very true. He's not that sympathetic about it. He's got a military officer's mindset. Deprivation is, it's what soldiers suffer. But there are definitely limits. And he's right that food delivery was a big issue, and production. And, you can't starve your soldiers or your population. They were worried about what was going to happen back home. Those of them who were peasants, how are their families going to be able to eat? So those were very real concerns. It's also a bachelor's point of view, frankly. Dmitri did not have to worry about children back in Russia that he was responsible for. Okay, this is a very interesting statement. I see much more danger in the behavior of the army itself than in the actions of the maximalist cabinet. Okay, yeah, fair enough. The army is crucial. The cabinet's not going to be able to do anything if it doesn't have the support of the army. And Dmitri thinks, I think rightly so, that the soldiers were so fed up that they were very vulnerable to being radicalized, to becoming fanatical Bolsheviks themselves in some cases. Not in the majority, I think, but, most of them just wanted to go back to their life and have land to farm. But, there were enough of them who were really radicalized that they were a real danger. And he's quite right to put the emphasis on the danger of the people who are down there making the decisions with bayonets and with guns and with behavior, rather than, this intellectual cabinet at the top that depends entirely on being able to sway the people. Something should be said about terms like Republicans and Democrats. If any of you who are watching this are American, you certainly cannot take those terms at face value. In this context, a Republican would be a radical, and a Democrat would basically be a communist. So Dmitri is talking about Democrats in terms of the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. And he's quite cynical, of course, about the Mensheviks, which, I think his cynicism is misplaced. I think he should be cynical about the Bolsheviks. And he claims to sympathize with them on the basis of them being people of action and idealists who are going to go out there and die for what they believe. Yeah, I'm not so sure. I think maybe the maximalists, I mean, they were all internationalists, so they weren't prioritizing Russia as a nation. But I think the Mensheviks, would have had more at heart what was good for ordinary people. I don't think the Bolsheviks had that at heart at all. I think the Bolsheviks were the one who just wanted power, and in a lot of cases were simply opportunists. Some of them psychopaths. Let's jump on the Bolshevik bandwagon because we can have fun and we can gain power. And yeah, the Mensheviks were intellectuals, they were abstract thinkers, but they weren't extremists. And Dmitri was never an extremist, so it's kind of interesting at this point that it's the extremist that he admires. And that was pretty typical of him. But, he was going to learn from that. He was not going to admire the extremists in the right wing in the emigration. He was definitely going to understand in the future that extremism is not good for anyone, and that extremism almost always covers up a deeply cynical and bad actors. Okay, so what else? This idea of the Mensheviks wanting to live at other people's expense, wanting power, wanting to live at other people's expense. As I say, I think it was the Bolsheviks who were power hungry, not the Mensheviks. As far as living at other people's expense, well, that's a bit the pot calling the kettle black, isn't it? To use, an English language idiom. I mean, the imperial family, to a certain extent, lived at other people's expense, although their yearly income came from the appanage properties, so from the land they owned, the agricultural land they owned, so it didn't come from taxpayers' money. As such, but Dmitri was living at the expense of the Marlings, So yeah, I get it. We're not always looking at ourselves first when we criticize other people. Okay, let's see. Yeah, the idea of desertion. This is very, very offensive, of course, to a member of a professional military, a standing army, and Dmitri, he considered himself, rightly or wrongly, to be a professional officer. What he is really, really dead on about, as I said before, is that the people are going to make their choice known, and if their choice for the Bolsheviks is because they've been deceived, well, that's horrible. But he's right to invest the power in the people themselves at this point. And he will always maintain, however cynical he is about the people and this idea of them not sufficiently loving the motherland, he'll always, even in immigration, when he's with young Russia, when he's thinking that he's a possible contender for the throne, he's always going to emphasize that whatever is established in Russia, whether it's a monarchy or anything else, it has to have the support of the people or it's not going to work. And of course, he was quite right about that. But this idea of who loves Russia and who loves the motherland, obviously he considers himself a person who has this true love of the motherland. I like the way he puts this there. The struggle between them, meaning the Mensheviks, the Democrats, and those who come relying on the true wishes of the people and true love of the motherland. So, you know, and he talks again about these, so these new committees of public safety. Well, the committees of public safety were there in opposition to the Bolshevik Soviets, and in that sense, they were a step in the right direction. But he's saying they're saying they want to save the motherland and the revolution. And this was language that you heard. Even in the immigration, you know, a group like Young Russia, they were at pains to emphasize, we don't want to turn back the clock. We don't want to undo what happened with the revolution. So that was a big point of contention. Also now in 1970. And if you really wanted to discredit someone, you would say, they want to erase the revolution. They want to end the revolution, meaning they want to erase, you know, what the good things that have occurred, whatever any individual thought those were. Yeah, so there is so much I could say about this, and so much I should say about this. You know, this idea that it's good that Kerensky and the provisional government didn't win because it's better now for, you know, for the Democrats, the Mensheviks, to be focused on their struggle with the Bolsheviks, and these various groups to be struggling with each other and with the Bolsheviks, so that, you know, people who do love the motherland will be the ones that he talks about coming later, those who come and who will benefit from the weakening of all these other groups. Yeah, anyway, what do we have next time? Well, next time we're going to zoom in on the people back home, and some really interesting stuff. Felix Yusupov, for one, will be mentioned. So, yeah, do come back for that, and I'll see you then, hopefully. Bye.